Hey, Drew. Tommy Givens here, professor of the course. Welcome. Great to have you in the class. Wanted to send along a video reply here in week one as we kind of get our conversation started. Gives me a chance to say hello a little more directly and also give you some feedback on what you've written here in week one, which is great in both response forums. I think one of my favorite lines in the first response that you've written. Let's see if I can find it real quick here, but it's basically where you say, oh, yes, end of the second paragraph. In this way, you're talking about this kind of drama of God's promises, Israel's obedience, disobedience, the reciprocity there. And you say, in this way, Israel serves us and continues to serve us as a way to more fully understand God. I love that because it points very directly to something about Israel that I think is often underplayed, and that is that it is in its intergenerational dramatic life a disclosure of God, an unveiling of God's presence in the world. And that's not to be underestimated in terms of its significance. And then something that flows from that that I think you've emphasized both in this response forum and the next one, and that's going to set you up well for the Gospel of Matthew and just kind of tracking with it, is that Israel is not an idealized people in the Bible. It is not this kind of entity that you belong to by meeting certain criteria that are ideal or conditions by believing the right thing or being obedient or being faithful, whereby then we would have this thing that people get removed from because they don't comply. That's just not the way that the people of God is presented in the Bible. And as you say, this is something about Jesus's own people, his history, even the kingdom, with all of the moral ambiguities of that institution that he embraces as his own. And this, I think, has all kinds of things to teach us about some of the pitfalls of interpreting the Bible, our life as Christians, following Jesus, in terms of living up to some kind of ideal. There are all kinds of, I think, downstream effects of that sort of assumption. And so I'm glad that you've kind of highlighted the way that that's not how the people of God is, or how the memory of Jesus or who Jesus is, according to Matthew. This obviously raises a question in a lot of people's minds of like, oh, well, then isn't there accountability? Does it matter how we live? Does it matter what we believe? And you can't get very far in the Bible or Matthew without recognizing that no, this unconditional commitment of God to people doesn't mean they're unaccountable. Quite the contrary. It turns out it's kind of hell to be Israel a lot of times in the history of the world and to be Jesus. There are all kinds of burdens associated with bearing the name of God in the world. And on the people of Israel, God brings consequences when they stray, when they are unfaithful, when their life becomes filled with injustice. But it doesn't ever constitute some basis whereby God would disown them. And even the difficulties, the curses that they endure are in the Bible an expression of God's ongoing presence with them, commitment to them. And that I think is key to how God is with us, according to Matthew and Jesus. Jesus doesn't stand aloof from his people's sins. He doesn't pretend that they're not his problem. He embraces his people's corruption as his own. He does this by his baptism, by the way that he shares life with his people. When he confronts authorities, he warns them when they reject him, but he doesn't disown them. And the same could be said and should be said, especially of his disciples, who all desert him in the end. And he says that he will not forsake them. So we're going to see that this is really key to who Jesus is, this solidarity with his people in their corruption and their difficulties. Obviously, the sort of most extreme presentation of this is in the way that he dies, becoming the curse of his people, becoming an abomination, warning them, you might say, with his body, where the patterns of their life are leading, but in that way, uh, keeping those consequences from finally destroying them and creating the possibility of making life out of death over generations. So that's in the kind of seed form, as I think you've begun to capture here in the genealogy. So love that. And I'm glad you took the time to listen to this podcast that I do with my friend Corey, because it does kind of give you a window probably into some of my predispositions or uh, maybe even obsessions as a teacher at Fuller. Um, I I really want us to try to sink into this gospel in a way that is self-examining and doesn't simply traffic in the canned things that we've learned that we're supposed to say about Jesus, about being Christian, that sort of thing. I think that's part of what the Bible is for. So you've gotten us off to, I think, to a good start with what you've written here in week one, and especially with just the kind of camping on the the highs, the lows, the ambiguities, the messiness of this genealogy and what it tells us about uh, God's presence in our world and what it means to follow Jesus. Hopefully, as people who bear witness to um, not some ideal that causes us to repress our sins and do all kinds of other nasty things, but people who bear witness to a God who does not give up on people and people who are making life out of death. So thanks again for great response, and looking forward to having you in the class and to more conversation.